Hi, welcome back. I just want to give a brief summary of today's last chunk of Philippians and then just a little bit on what I feel like I've learned from the whole of Philippians. We looked at the very last thing Paul says, or last things Paul says in this letter. He tells them to be content in every circumstance. That's couched in thanks for the gift they've given. They were the only church that remembered him at the time and sent money. And what he says is that he's actually grateful for their sake, that they've been generous. But he has learned, whether he has plenty or whether he has very little, to be satisfied. We thought about how that's not to be applied broad brush about everything, or we'd never change anything. There are many things in the world to be changed, many injustices that the church needs to deal with. But as individuals, it can be very healthy for us to be content, if we can, with the resources we have, rather than being jealous of others or being bitter when we don't have as much as we'd like. It's part of Paul being heavenly minded, focusing on the kingdom of heaven. We also thought about his greetings from the house of Caesar and how that might link to the fact that he's in jail, that he says some people have come to faith, some of the palace guard, or at least they know why he's in prison. And also, someone suggested very cleverly that perhaps he knows that they might be reading his mail. And so when he says, "My God will meet your needs," it's not so much just for the Philippians, but it's for the people that might not be Christians that might be reading this letter. Certainly something I'd never thought of. We spoke today also about the bigger picture in Philippians, how it teaches us about perspective and about attitudes. The perspective is that they are citizens of heaven, that they should be heavenly minded, and they should make that their primary concern. That above all, Paul wants them, and Paul wants himself, to know Jesus and to find identity there. That's their primary source of identity. They are in Christ. And from that being in Christ, belonging to Jesus, and finding their home in heaven rather than anywhere else, from that position, they are able to have a new attitude, that they are to be full of thanksgiving, full of rejoicing, that they're able to think positively. But this is not grounded on nothing. Many people will tell you to think positive, but often it's not grounded on anything. But their hope is in Jesus. Their positivity, their rejoicing and thanksgiving is founded on what God has already done for them through Jesus. And this is of the most importance. We talked a little bit, as we have a few times, about that it isn't actually possible, as others have pointed out. It's not possible to be too heavenly minded to be of earthly use. If you're not of earthly use, then it's very unlikely you're actually of heavenly mindedness, because no one is more heavenly minded than God. And yet for him, that meant coming to live among us by his Son. And so this is not about being disinterested in the world, but this is about where we find our identity. Now, we didn't deal with it here, but we don't believe that our faith is all about escaping the earth to heaven. Heaven is the rule of God right now. And so when we talk about heavenly mindedness, we're not talking about escaping this world. We're talking about when God rolls heaven and earth back into one, when they are unified, and when God's rule is visible and seen on earth. That's the future that we belong to, and that's how we live just now. Although the gospel is not spelled out in this letter of Philippians, there is one section in particular. It's the beautiful hymn or early church psalm or song. It talks about Jesus not holding on to the equality that he had with God, but he let it go, the opposite of what Adam and Eve did. He let that equality with God go, so that he could humble himself and live among us as a servant. And a certain application for me, which I think is relevant, although it's not directly what Paul was talking about, something we could maybe learn from and draw from this letter, is that humility, that if we could humble ourselves before one another, if we could find our identity, our unified identity in Jesus, then things might go better for us. For example, we strive to find equality. We strive in our society to recognise that we are equal. But Paul took all of the secondary characteristics that he had been very proud of. He took his ethnicity and his background and the fact that he was a Hebrew of Hebrews, he was Aramaic speaking, he was of the tribe of Benjamin, he was a Pharisee. All of these secondary things, he said, were worthless to him apart from knowing Jesus, being in Christ and knowing Jesus better. Could it be that the source of the equality that we are looking for is found in Christ? We are equal in Christ. That's certainly where the New Testament finds our equality, that in Jesus, those who believe are equal with one another, regardless of where they come from or any of these other things that are their background. Now, it's not that those things are not important. I think Paul is using hyperbole. He's exaggerating, but he's showing that all of these things around his ethnicity and his background, all of these things that were once so important to him, are secondary to knowing Jesus, being in Christ. And it's that same Paul that says that there isn't Jew or Greek anymore, that there isn't male or female, there isn't slave or free, or male and female, or slave and free. He says we are one in Christ Jesus. Could it be that we, by humbling ourselves before one another, being thankful and grateful towards one another, might we find that equality that is already ours through Jesus? That's just a thought. I hope that you've enjoyed learning from the book of Philippians.